Alright, hello. I'm going to do a little bit different in this video. I'm going to have a game that's already kind of created and I'm going to demo it right now. Then we're going to kind of walk through how it works, but I'm not going to actually be typing the code. So notice here I got a couple things happening. I got a background scrolling, I've got bullets coming out, my character goes up and down. When I hold the button it goes up and down, but notice it does go up and down pretty smoothly. There's no stagger from a delay. As I hold it, if I hold the fire button, nothing happens. It just shoots one shot. I have to actually release it to shoot. When my guys get to the end of the screen, you notice their lives go down, and when I get 3 lives, it says game over. I also have a help screen in there. If I actually had that going while I was playing, you would notice that it would pause the game. So that's the game we're making. You can do something similar. You can use slightly different characters as well. But I'm going to walk you through how we create it. Very similar to what we've done in the last assignment with the runner class and the organizer. The runner class has one extra thing in it, and I'm going to show you that a little bit later. But let's start with our organizer. The organizer is basically organized into 3 areas. We have our pane organizer at our constructor at the top. Then we have a setup class down here. And then we have an animate class down here. And now we actually, method down here. Now we actually have a whole bunch of other helper methods that are down lower, and we'll get to some of those as we go as well. Now one thing you're going to notice is we have defined a lot of things at the top. Now some of this I put up here just so that if I wanted to make changes, I can. So for example, if I want to change the width and the height of my screen, I can do that dynamically right here. Now I have a whole bunch of images that I'm going to use, and so I hard-coded the locations here so I could kind of see them all in one spot, and so these are just static variables. And then this D weapons is the delta weapons and delta villains. That's how fast each of them moves. And again, I put that at the top, so if I want to make a change, it's very easy for me to make that change. Now you'll notice all of my characters. I have a hero image, I have a hero weapon, and I have a villain image. I'm getting all those from this icon archive. You can use anyone that you want. You can search for the similar ones that I have, but I would just go out to icon archive. I won't try to copy this link exactly, but take a look out there, and you'll notice that my characters are 32 by 32, and my weapon is 16 by 16. So you want to get something in similar sizes. Now we define a bunch of variables, and I'll talk you through some of these as we go. But let me just give you a heads up. So our weapons, since we're going to have more than one weapon on the screen, we need to have them in an array list. Same thing with my villains. I can have more than one villain on the screen. Now we had been using that border panel, or border pane. Instead of using that this time, we're just using a generic pane, and the difference here is we're not actually trying to organize things and put things relative to each other. We're actually going to use it more as a blank screen, and we're going to position everything with a relative X and Y position. So we're using this group layout instead, and then we're just going to basically add different pieces to that on the screen at various spots on the screen, and then we're going to kind of move them through. So let's take a look at our setup. So our setup has a couple things happening. First of all, we're initializing a couple variables, our scores and our lives. I'll talk a little bit about this throwing later. But we have to have image views to put them in. We can't just put in a URL into our project. We can't even just put an image in. We have to have an image view, which is essentially like a node inside of our a node holding our image. Now these two are just creating images right now. We're not creating the image view. The others, like our hero and our backgrounds, we're actually going straight from the image to our image view. The reason why we're not doing that with our villain and our weapon is because we're going to actually create multiple versions of those, and so right now I'm just creating the image. The others I go straight to my image view. And again, the image view is the node that I can put into my screen. Now I'm going to set up my backgrounds. I have 2 backgrounds that are the same exact image. You'll notice the image is the same. One of them starts at 0, 0. The other starts at 1023.0. And this background is actually 1022 wide. And so this is starting one space over from that edge. And so that they basically go back to back. And so I'm putting 2 images right next to each other that will extend essentially off of my screen. But as they scroll through, one image seam ends up with the other, and when I get to the edge of the screen and one of them is off the screen, the other one will still be on the screen, and I'm going to actually then move it over and keep them kind of going, and I'll show you how that works. Now my hero, I put out there, I'm putting him at position x10, and y position is going to be h divided by 2, so whatever my height is. I'm adding my score text and my lives text, initializing the score at 0. Lives should be whatever I want it to be. And then I'm changing the color and I'm setting the locations. So again, all of my locations in my setup are all relative XY positions, not like the others where we kind of set everything up to each other. Again, I create a help button, I relocate it to X500, Y10, and I set the on action. The on action here is calling a method, which is my help screen. Now I also need to set this focus transversal false, and what that means is I can't select it when I hit a key. Since I'm using keyboard input for this, I don't want to have that be one of the highlighted pieces. So I'm basically saying set the focus transversal to false, and that does not allow me to hit tab or move over or hit an arrow key and select that button. I have to select it only by clicking. Then I go ahead and add everything. So that's my setup. Then I get to my animation. So the animation is using this animation timer. So again, you'll notice here with the animation timer, it is a functional interface. So I have one method that I have to create, and that is that public handle. And when I create that public handle, this method runs 30 times a second. And so what does this do? Well, basically it looks at these two variables, go north and go south. And if go north is held up, then I'm subtracting 4 from my y. Remember that subtracting 4 on y means I'm heading up. Go south, if that button is held down, then I'm subtracting, or I'm adding 4, so I'm going down. And then it basically looks and it can change those two. So if I'm putting both of them down, then it's going to offset. Takes that delta, you'll see how it uses that in a second. This here piece is looking at a mod function just to basically add my villains. So I start at, I'm using a mod of 45, and I start that in every second and a half I essentially create a villain, because again 30 frames per second, this will increment up right here. Every time it gets to a mod of 45, then I end up getting a new villain created right here. Then the other part of this, just basically move my villain based on my delta. So, I'm sorry, moving all of my villains based on the delta that I set. Move all of my weapons. Move my hero to his current location plus the delta that I had. Then I'm going to check and see if any of my weapons are hitting a villain. And I'm also going to scroll my background. And these are all sub-methods there. Then I'm going to check too if my lives is 0, it's game over. So that's for my animation cycle. Again, relatively basic piece here, but all of the action is really kind of happening down lower. Let's go take a look at this go north and go south. That's essentially coming from my key handler. So if I come down here to my key press, when I press a key, I set my values to true. So if I push the up button, then go north becomes true. When I release a key down here, when I release the up button, go north becomes false. So what this does is it allows me to have a very smooth motion. When I push the button down, it starts moving. I don't have to wait for the space or for the repeat to kind of kick in. It just starts moving in a nice smooth manner. When I release the button, it stops instantly. Now space would be the same idea, except with space what I wanted to do is I wanted to make it so that I couldn't just lay on the space bar and constantly fire. So with this one, I use this throwing boolean. When I hit the space bar, it sets it to true, and once I set it to true, I create a weapon, but I can't create another weapon because I'm saying if throwing is currently true, don't create a new weapon. So I have to release the space bar right here to reset throwing to false, and once I reset that to false, then I can press the space bar again and shoot again. So that's how my action works. Now where does this get called, this key press event? Well, this gets called back in our runner class, and I'll show you that at the end. Okay, let's go back up. We skipped over our scrolling background. So our scrolling background code is relatively straightforward. Every time my cycle goes through, I call this method once. What I do is I get my current layout and I just subtract 1 from it. So I'm scrolling both of these to the left, 1 pixel every cycle through. And then I check here, okay, if my background is more than 1023 off the screen, so it's an entire width off of the screen, Then I go and I actually move it and I reset the layout to positive 1023, which will basically cycle it. And I'm doing that with both of them. And then the effect here is, again, that I have these back-to-back backgrounds. So I have two of them. One of them is always on, well, they're usually both always partially on the screen, but when one gets fully off the screen, it moves back to the start, lines up, and waits for its turn to come back onto the screen. Okay, let's go back up and take a look. So we looked at how we have our pieces there. Let's look at the move hero, and we'll look at our villain pieces as well. So move hero is a really simple method. I'm just basically looking at moving my hero up and down, but I am checking the bounds of him. And so I'm looking at making sure he doesn't go below 0 or below the height. And what this is doing, this is actually dynamically looking at the height of my hero. So I take the height of my screen and I subtract the height of my hero. So my hero is 32 wide. So I want to make sure that I don't go partially off the screen, and that's what this is doing here. What happens with the hero, his position is actually his top left point. And so when I look at that point, that top left point, to stay fully on the screen, I have to basically stay at least 32 above the screen, and that's what this is checking here for. So again, I'm checking as long as he fits in there, I move him to the new location. If he doesn't fit in there, I don't move him, he stays where he is. So move villains and move the weapons are very similar. I'm basically going through my array. I have this delta that was passed to me right here, and that was called based on what I wanted to move. And I'm basically just going through and I'm checking to see if the villain is still on the screen, move him. If he's not on the screen, then I have to remove him. So right here it checks as long as his X position is currently greater than -50, so he's basically still partially on the screen, then just set his new location based on his current location plus the delta. Otherwise, this is where he's off the screen. So now with a villain, if a villain goes off the screen, I'm taking a life away, and I'm redrawing my life, my lives there. Otherwise, you notice I'm doing two things. I'm taking him off of the screen, off the board, so I do board get children and remove him. And I also remove him from my array, and we'll see how he gets put in the array here where I create my villain. So again, creating my villain, I have a villain here. I take my image that I've already created above and I create a new node. And then I'm putting him at a random Y location. That's what this part here is doing. And full width of the screen. So he's off at the very edge of the screen. And I'm basically putting him on that spot, adding him as a member of the array, and then adding him as a child in the board pane organizer. So that's basically it. That's my villain. The weapons are very similar. You're going to notice here, moving the weapons is the same. I don't have to, when it gets off the edge of the screen, I just have to remove it. I don't have to necessarily worry about it coming off the screen or off of the node or anything like that. Creating weapons, same as how I created the villains, except now with this one, where I relocate it to, I want it to relocate to right where the villain was, or right where my hero was. So I'm getting my hero's X layout and my hero's width to start, because I want it to start just to the right of my hero. And then I'm also getting the hero Y layout. And that's, so my X position is this here. Their X position plus the width of the hero, and the Y position is just the Y position of the hero. Then I add the weapon, put him on the screen. Okay. Now check hit's a little bit more involved. What I need to do is I'm using this bounds and intersects methods. So I'm basically checking. I have to loop through every weapon and every villain and check them. And so I do this double loop through the weapon array, loop through the villain array. And then I'm looking at this current weapon, get its bounds, and check to see if it intersects with my current villain. And I get the bounds of my current villain. If it does intersect, then I need to remove my current villain and my current weapon, and I need to remove them from my array in both spots. I increase the score and I redraw my score. And then once I have a hit, I can break out of this loop, and I know that this is here basically because I don't want to check that villain anymore, because I've removed it. If I check it again, then it's going to cause an error. So then what this is going to do is it's going to basically say, okay, now go to your next weapon because this one is done. Okay. So again, take a look at that code, but it's basically just going through each weapon and each villain and checking if any of them are overlapping. And if they are, it removes them and increases the score. Now my help screen, a little bit different than what we've seen. We're actually creating a new stage. Okay. And we're using this application modal. And what that does is it basically says you can't go anywhere until this has been removed. So we're creating a new stage, giving it a title, setting a width, we're setting it to application modal, we're putting our labels on, just like we would do any other stage. And then when I'm ready, I just set the scene and I show and wait. So now I'm just waiting for it to close. Now notice in here too that when I hit the OK button, I start my timer again. The very first thing I did when I pulled this up was I stopped my timer. So this stops my cycle timer so that the game doesn't continue. And when I hit the OK button, I close this stage and I start my timer again and go from there. So again, check this out. Very similar to what we've seen. I'm going to just take you a little while to put it in and let me know if you have questions there. Finally, game over. Once the game's over, I stop my timer and I print on the screen game over, just basically putting a text box there and doing that. I used a text box. I probably could have used a label there instead, but it is what it is. So that's the pane organizer. Hopefully you got all that as we went through. Much more lengthy, but again, a few new concepts, a few concepts that we've seen before. All right, let's look back now at our runner class. Our runner class is the same with the exception of these two lines in the middle. Because the key press is on the scene, I couldn't necessarily tie that into the pane organizer, so I did need to put this key press method right here. And so I have two of them. I have a scene on key press and a scene on key release. And you'll notice that those call back to the organizer class, and they call that method that we created there. So again, the net effect, when I run it, you'll see it comes out. I just wanted to pause one spot here with the help screen. You'll see how everything pauses. And when I get to the end, that's game over. Let me do one more thing here. I'm going to play this for a second, and you'll see the backgrounds, how they are working at one point. This background is pretty good. You don't necessarily notice too much, but right here you'll notice the seam of the two backgrounds. So as those two backgrounds are scrolling, they basically butt up against each other. When one gets off the screen, it jumps it back over, and that's how my backgrounds are working. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.